Okay, so good morning again, and we're in class 34 in the book Touching a City's Soul, Bikur Chicago, which is the teachings that the previous Rebbe did when he visited Chicago in 1942, and we're on page 161. I'm going to review from the beginning of the mimer just a bit. We had that break last week, so it's been a couple of weeks since we had class. And remember, a mimer, Hasidic discourse, always starts with a quote from some place in the revealed aspects of Torah, whether it's a verse or a quote from the Talmud or something like that. And this one begins with the pasuk, with the verse, "I'm dark but beautiful, daughters of Yerushalayim." And we talked about how this refers to actually a discussion between two groups of souls. And one group of souls is saying to the other group of souls that I'm darkened by my own deeds and my own experience here in the physical world, and the deeds that I do because I am connected to an animal soul and a body. So the deeds that I do, and the Torah mitzvahs that I do, and the I should say, and the pull of the nefesh habahamis, of the animal soul, and the Yetzer Hara, pulls me, so I can be, or I have been darkened. But I am beautiful, daughters of Yerushalayim. I'm beautiful anyway because even though I have come into this group of souls who's describing, I've come into a body and I am subject to all of the pulls of the physical world, but when I choose to do Torah mitzvahs, I become beautiful. And I'm beautiful because also it says that I'm beautiful because of the deeds of my forefathers, which refer to like the hidden inherited soul powers, the soul powers of self-sacrifice and faith. And so I have both of these packages with me, and when I use them to serve Hashem and do Torah mitzvahs, I become beautiful, daughters of Yerushalayim, talking to another group of souls, the daughters of Yerushalayim, who are in heaven and not subjected to the temptations of the physical world. So this group of souls is talking to the other group of souls and saying that even though this group, we have come down into the physical world, and we're darkened by our bodily experiences, but still we are beautiful because we have, when we do mitzvahs, either from our revealed soul powers, our intellect, our emotions, or our concealed soul powers, which are the self-sacrifice and faith that we inherit from our forefathers. So it's an interesting thing that it's emphasizing that even if that makes the point that even if somebody has become darkened, they can revert back to their former beauty. So that's what the souls are saying, is that they're dark, but they're beautiful. And not only that, it says that on a sort of on a deeper level, the souls are saying to the other group of souls, even we sort of have become even more beautiful than you in a certain way, because the level of the soul that is reached once it's come into the body and overcome the temptations and done Torah mitzvahs, it reaches a higher level, a purer level than even the souls that are called the daughters of Jerusalem, who haven't come down yet into bodies. They even reach like a higher, deeper connection, even than the daughters of Yerushalayim. And that is explained by the second part of the mimer, which is sort of using a different verse to explain this, which is a garden spring, a well of fresh waters, a well of living waters, is the souls refer to that. The souls refer to a spring, the neshama, because it's the primary source of flowing water, just like the neshama is the primary source of life for the body. So it's called a garden spring. And it's called a garden spring because it's called a spring because of the life force, like the water is a life force, but it's called a garden spring because it comes from Gan Eden, from the Garden of Eden. And that even though it is true that all people have a soul, and there are different, all people have an neshama, and all neshamas are called a garden spring, but just there's different levels of souls, and just like he's going to explain this more in today's section, but he mentions it in the last section, that just another reason why it's called a well of waters is because the water, the way that we get fresh water is it goes through the underground channels and it comes out into this well of fresh water because it's gone through the dirt, and like the stone and the rubble and the dirt, as it passes through, sort of purifies it and pulls out the impurities and it refines it. And so too, our going through like the dirt, our neshama going through the dirt of this world sort of refines our soul to get it to a higher level. And that's the water, the saltiness of the water, it says, is taken up by the ground, and it becomes palatable drinking water. Now, it goes into like looks like a bit of a digression that, water is life-giving. It says even though food is life-giving, and it's true that food is life-giving and we are filled by food, but it is also true that water is life-giving, and that water restores the soul in a way that food doesn't. I guess we can all experience that after fast, right? Usually after fast, the first thing that people want to do is drink water versus, eat something. After they've had a drink, then they're ready to eat something. But usually people want to drink first thing, or even, you get up in the morning, you want to drink first thing versus eat right away. So there's a certain regeneration that drinking, and then goes also into this idea of, the difference between fainting and sleeping, and that when a person faints or is in a fainting state, water revives them more than food revives them. And so therefore, it says the person's faculties can be restored with water. So that's like the idea, again, of the soul, which is going to get into now in section 3. So we're on page 161. Okay, ready? Alrighty. So here we go. Okay. So this is the meaning of a garden spring, a well of fresh water, right? Referring to the soul. The soul is called a spring because it descends from a place in the gardens above, the higher Gan Eden and lower Gan Eden, right? Just like the garden spring. And just as the water of the ocean seeps through the underground channels and eventually penetrates through the ground and becomes fresh spring water, so too the neshama, as a result of its descent below to become clothed in a body and a nefesh abahamis, an animal soul, pierces through the dust of the earth, which is the body, created from the dust, and becomes fresh water. Such a beautiful parable, really. Such a beautiful way of expressing it, right? I mean, just the imagery is so, like, we need to have an artist paint this or something. It's like such a beautiful image, right? The ocean water going through the ground, and the saltiness is taken out to become drinking water in a well, right? We get an underground spring, and the soul going through the dust of the earth, meaning the body, because the body was made from the dust of the earth, purifies the soul, and it becomes fresh water.
He's a great writer, Chaya.
He's a great writer.
Yeah, he is.
Very vivid imagery, right? It really,
yes.
It's very vivid imagery, and you get the feeling like he just says it. He's just so, yeah, very vivid. The Rebbe proceeds to explain how the neshama achieves elevation through its descent into the physical world. It is written, God formed man from the dust of the earth. Man's creation thus differs from that of the rest of created beings, whether inanimate, plant, or animal. Remember, there's 4 levels of creation. I'm sure we've spoken about it in other classes. It's called the 4 levels of creation. Daimim, Sameach, Chai, Medaber. Inanimate, which is actually, the Rebbe prefers, I think, from the translation of Tanya, we learned that the Rebbe prefers it to be translated as silent, plant, animal, or human. So even though they're all part of the physical creation, the creation of mankind is completely different than the creation of the other 4 levels of creation, as will be explained now, right? That it's complete. God form man from the dust of the earth versus everything else, because for the body and soul of all other created beings, inanimate, plant, and animal, are consonant to one another and of comparable nature. For example, the body and soul, so to speak, of inanimate objects correspond to one another, one to the other. Everything else in creation, Hashem spoke into being. Let there be this, let there, Yehi ar, Vayhi ar, let there be light. There was like, there should be, plants, there should be animals. Everything was spoken, and then that part of creation that was created from that speech of Hashem was created, body and soul together at once. One entity, body and soul. Now, when we're talking about soul, as he explains here, the body of an inanimate object is its material substance. The soul of an inanimate object is a divine life force invested in it, right? There's things that, like, let's say rocks and minerals, they don't have a soul the way that we usually use the term soul, but what we mean when we say soul is we mean the divine energy that keeps it in existence, which is true of a person's soul too, but the type of soul of a rock is very different than the type of soul of a person. The type of soul of a plant, the type of soul of an animal is also very different from a person's soul. But nevertheless, and we see it actually, I should say, that in the fact that when Hashem created every other aspect of creation, he just said, let there be whatever, and that came into being, and then that was it, that came into being. Body and soul together, its life force and its physicality at the same time. Mankind was the only thing that was created in two stages, right? First, he formed the body of man from the dust of the earth, and then he blew the soul into man. So it's two separate things and two separate stages and two separate parts of mankind that Hashem put together, where a body and a soul separately, and then it's put together, the body and the soul, which is different than everything else in creation. So while the body of an inanimate object is a composite of the four elements, fire, water, air, earth, its primary element is earth. The soul of the inanimate object is inanimate, silent, and unable to communicate, right? In Hebrew, the term for the lowest level of creation is daimim, which means, literally means silence. In English, that's usually called inanimate. We usually call a rock or something like that inanimate, a stone, we call it inanimate. But in Hebrew, the actual term is not inanimate, which just means without animation. It means silent. Domem, actually, the literal translation of the word daimim means silence. That's what it means. So the soul of an inanimate object, you would think a soul is what gives something movement, growth, something, like that's what makes it a soul, right? So how could a rock, it's just sitting there, it doesn't look like it's doing anything. How could it have a soul? But it's part of creation, and we know that nothing can be created unless there's a divine energy that's constantly creating it. So that's what we mean when we say the soul of the rock. But it's still silent and unable to communicate. We can't talk to rocks, or rocks can't talk to us. I suppose we could talk to rocks. I'm not sure we would be able to hear back. Although it does say in the times of Mashiach that the rocks are going to say, why are you walking on me if you're not saying words of Torah? Why do you think you're better than I am that you can just walk on me? So something to keep in mind, I suppose. The same is true of plants and animals. Their bodies and souls are of similar nature. They were also created, let there be this, let there be that, and they came into creation, body and soul, at the same time. By contrast, the bodies and souls of speakers, that's the highest level of creation, we usually call that humanity, are poles apart from one another. Again, it's interesting because the way that we refer to it in Hebrew is midaber. Domem literally means silent. Sameach means growth, growing. Chai means alive. That's the third category, and medaber means speaker. So the four categories, which we usually say, let's say inanimate, but let's say we're going to call it silent. Trees and plants, those are called the growth, things that grow, which could be understood. They grow, but they grow in place. Chai refers to the animal kingdom. They're alive, means they're alive. They can move around. They don't need to be rooted to their source of life, right? When you cut a flower grows from the ground. When you cut a flower from its roots, it lives for a little bit, but then eventually it dies. But an animal doesn't have to stay in one location and can move around. And so it's called alive, fully alive. And the highest level of creation is not called human. I don't know what, human probably comes from the word man. I don't know, somebody probably, Joni probably knows what the root of human is, but whatever it is, in Hebrew, medaber is speaker, that man is the only one who has language. In other words, being able to manipulate sounds to communicate, right? And that the first language was Hebrew, and God used it to create the world, and then from there the other languages developed. So we're called speakers, but we call that humanities. But for us, for this fourth level of creation, our bodies and souls are poles apart from each other. From the standpoint of his body, man is on a lower level than all the other creations on earth. For the other beings were created in their complete stature and spiritual form together with their souls. Unlike man, whose body was first formed from the earth and only later invested with the soul. So in a certain sense, we're lower than all the animals because we were first created it's completely inanimate body, right? It's like just from dust of the earth, from the lowest level of creation. Everything else was created from the speech of Hashem. However, from the perspective of his soul, man is superior to even the heavenly hosts and the ministering angels. Because the angels were also created just all at once, right? Just like the only part of creation that wasn't created all at once was human beings. So we are a composite of the highest level of creation, which is the soul that's blown into us from the inner depths of Hashem, and the lowest level of creation, which is the dust of the earth, which separately, here, it's not really developing this idea, but separately, we know that this idea is developed to keep it, like, we're supposed to, in fact, and the Gemara talks about, and Chassidus talks about how we're supposed to keep, the Gemara says, you're supposed to have two pockets and two pieces of paper, one in each pocket. In one pocket, it should say, I'm but dust and ashes. And in the other pocket, it should say, for me, the world was created. To remind ourselves that at the same time, we need to be humble in the face of creation because we are here to serve Hashem, and we were created to, to do our job. And if, God forbid, a human being behaves inappropriately or makes an immoral choice, we're lower than an animal, and an animal kills not for sport, they kill to eat, right? And a lion, that we wouldn't say a lion that's killing a sheep is murdering the sheep. He's hungry, that's what they do. They eat animals. They're not doing it for fun, they're doing it because that's what they have. They're amoral, they're not immoral. But a person who kills another person, we would say, well, that's immoral, right? So in some sense, we could be lower than everything else in creation. And at the same time, if we make a moral choice, we make a godly choice, and we use our powers and our abilities and our physicality and everything we have at our disposal to serve Hashem, then we've elevated the world, something else that the other parts of creation also can't do, right? They can't make moral choices either way. They're sort of pre-programmed. They need us to utilize them to serve Hashem, and then they become elevated. So we either can elevate all of creation, or we sort of denigrate all of creation. So at the same one, and that's sort of epitomized by the idea that we were created of a body and a soul, and then put together. The highest level of creation, the lowest level of creation, put together. It's also the reason why man was created last. It says in the Gemara, in the Medrash, I believe it's the Medrash, that says, we were created last because the idea is that if a person's behaving inappropriately, they need to tell themselves even a mosquito was created before you. The lowest being of creation was even created before you. Or another way of looking at it is everything was set and ready for this special guest. So that, when you want to have a guest, you put out the linens, you give them a snack, you prepare food, whatever it is, you get everything ready for them so that when they come in, everything's all set and ready for them. So like the world is set and ready for us to use properly. But if, God forbid, a person decides to use the world improperly, then it's like, well, even a mosquito was created before you. So don't get so high on yourself, kind of a thing. Okay, back into the text, page 163. Man's body and soul are thus poles apart from one another, right? The body is from the dust of the earth. The soul is from the essence of Hashem. That's pretty opposite. Through the neshama being enclosed in the body and being occupied with Torah, mitzvahs, and prayer, the service of the heart, purifying and elevating material objects, it becomes like fresh waters. It's just such a beautiful, it's just beautiful. It just becomes more and more beautiful the more the previous Rebbe discusses it, right? It's like you just imagine the soul's like going, it's like that water that's going through the underground channels and comes out fresh water, that salty water comes out fresh water. And it's like the soul goes into the body, the dust of the earth, and it comes out like fresh waters. Before the neshama's descent down below, although it was located in the heavenly gardens, the higher and lower Gan Eden, remember we said there are levels to the souls. There's different levels to the souls. They're all living wells of spring water, living fresh spring water, fresh living spring water, but they're not all the same exact levels. So there's a higher level of a Gan Eden, lower level of a Gan Eden. But nonetheless, wherever it is, when it was in a state of constant love and awe of God and complete nullification to godliness, before the soul came into the body, it's in a constant state of love and awe of God. It's not, there's no like crisis of faith. It's just part of God. It's just there basking in the radiance of Hashem. But listen to this. It could nevertheless be compared to salty ocean water. The soul above is like salty ocean water. Why? Why is such a high level compared to salty ocean water? Now, salt is going to have an incredibly high spiritual level to it, but we still can't drink salty water. And some people say you shouldn't really eat very salty food either, just saying, right? Like we use salt to kosher food. So there is a very high spiritual potential for salt, but we can't drink salty water. Okay, in truth, salt represents a very lofty spiritual level, and therefore the Torah instructs on all of your offerings, you shall offer salt, right? That's one of the things that we know in the Beis Hamikdash. Every single offering, every single carbon had to have salt with it when it was burnt on the Mizbeach. In fact, all 4 levels of creation were represented on the altar. Salt was the representation of the mineral kingdom, of the Siren kingdom. The animal, let's back up. The wine offering or the meal offering was representative of the tzomeach level, the growing level. The animal was representative of the animal level, and the person who was bringing the carbon was representative of the human level, right? So there was always all 4 elements of creation because we're trying to elevate all 4 levels of creation. So salt has a very high aspect to it. That's why it was brought on all of our offerings. We shall offer salt. Indeed, salt is referred to in that verse as the covenant of the Lord your God. It's called the covenant, the covenant of salt. Because salt alludes to such a lofty level, God imbued it with the natural property of preserving anything salted with it. Isn't that fascinating? I mean, that's where salt gets its ability to preserve things, right? When you salt things, they are preserved, they're pickled, they're preserved. That's what people did before refrigeration, right? They would take, cucumbers that were grown in the summer, they would pickle them and they'd be able to have them for the winter. And pickles. So salt preserves things because it has this high spiritual quality. It has the ability to preserve things. Nevertheless, seawater, which is salty, is unfit for drinking. So these have these 2 aspects to salt. There is a high level of salt. It's brought on the altar. It preserves things, but you can't drink water that's salty.
It's the Malko Saleta doctrine of opposites.
Right. We have to contain opposites, right? Things have to, right. We have to contain opposites, exactly. Yes. So here we have something very high, but it's not usable in this way. In fact, it's dangerous, right? The biggest danger for somebody who's shipwrecked in the middle of the ocean is that they're gonna get dehydrated, which is so non-intuitive, at first glance, because all they are surrounded by water. You would think that they would just starve to death, but no, the problem is dehydration because they can't drink the seawater. And the more they drink the seawater, the more dehydrated they get because it's so salty. So it's like a very, it's containing opposites, exactly. So, however, when the seawater passes through underground channels and penetrates through the ground above it, it then becomes fresh water that restores the soul. And that's the underground spring of water. We dig into the ground and you get the spring of water that's gone through the the earth and it somehow becomes fresh water. That's the parable. Now, that's the analogy. What's the analog? So too with the neshama. Precisely through its descent below and enclosement in a physical body, occupying itself with Torah mitzvos, it becomes fresh waters. So our neshama becomes fresh waters, which means it's like a higher, a purer level for having come down into the physical world, which of course, at first glance, it makes no sense, but at second glance, of course, otherwise, why would God put a soul in a body? Just to torture it? I mean, like, what would be the purpose of putting a soul in a body? Obviously, as it explains, this concept of Yerid l'tzarech aliyah, it's a descent in order for the purpose of an ascent. And it needs to, there's a descent, but there's an ascent afterwards. Otherwise, what's the purpose of the descent? If it's just going to be a descent, then there's no purpose for the descent. The descent has to be for the purpose of an ascent afterwards. What's the ascent? The soul, which is called daughters of Yerushalayim in heaven, basking in the love and awe of Hashem, has to come down into the physical world, into a physical body, which is the dust of the earth, and that is what makes it pure water. So that's why the souls who are in the physical world call out to the souls that are still in Gan Eden and say, I may be darkened by my deeds, but I am beautiful, daughters of Yerushalayim. Like this, before you look at what's going on, like understand the context, right? It's a good life lesson in general, probably for all of us, right? But like that idea of, this, we become beautiful from that. It's darkened, you get a little muddy because dirt is dirty, but it purifies. Okay, now it goes on to another idea, which is, which was related to this idea, but it goes on to another idea. But anybody want to say anything before we continue? Okay. So that's what it says. Goes on. This is the meaning. Goes on to another verse that's going to explain, like, sort of reiterate this idea sort of on a stronger level, right? This is the meaning of the verse. I regard your Torah, the Torah of your mouth, as superior than thousands of gold and silver. So this is like another verse that's going to emphasize this idea that we just said. And also we're going to explain this verse on a sort of on a mystical level. So the term in Hebrew, the verse in Hebrew is Tigli taras picha me alfe zahav v'kesef. Alfe, which means thousand, zahav, which means gold, and kesef, which means silver. But we're going to sort of retranslate a little bit some of those words. So gold and silver represent love, silver, and awe, gold. So silver, which is the word kesef, also shares the word lichseif, which means to yearn for something. So silver is like yearning for Hashem, the love of Hashem. Whereas gold is considered to be like reddish in color, so it's more from the side of gvura, so it's more the idea of awe of Hashem. And the thousands of gold and silver are the love and awe to which the neshama was accustomed when it was in the spiritual realms above before descending into the world. So the word thousands is me'alfei, which means thousands, but also alufa v'regila, accustomed, that it's usual for the soul. So now we're going back to retranslate and say that I regard the Torah of your mouth as superior than thousands of gold and silver. We're going to retranslate that verse now. I regard the Torah of your mouth as superior than the love and awe that the soul was accustomed to in the spiritual realms. In other words, that love and awe in Gan Eden that the soul experienced when it was called the daughters of Jerusalem is not as powerful as the Torah of your mouth that the person learns when they're in the physical world in a physical body, which is what he's going to say next. Nevertheless, the verse says that the Torah of your mouth is superior. This refers to the Torah person studies with his physical mouth in this world. So I'm going to just review that again, okay? Can't really see too many people's faces, but I can hear maybe that we should review the verse again. So I'm going to just reread the verse, okay? So as I regard the Torah of your mouth as superior than thousands of gold and silver. Again, we take a pasuk in Chassidus and we translate that pasuk literally, and then we translate that pasuk on an esoteric level, because every word in Hebrew has its literal meaning and its deeper meaning and another deeper meaning and another deeper, right? It's like there's 70 levels to Torah. So we're going to retranslate these words that have more than one way of translating them. And by retranslating them on a deeper level, we get a deeper idea of the verse. That's called learning like the secrets of that verse, right? That's the hidden message in that verse. So, and this hidden message is going to reinforce the idea that we just learned, that when the soul comes into the body in the physical world, it becomes more purified than even when it was just in the heavenly realms, basking in the love and awe of Hashem continuously. That's not the highest level the soul can reach. And again, we're saying why would that be the case? Otherwise, like, of course, otherwise, why would the soul be put into the physical body? Like, what would be the purpose? Why would God have created the world in that manner unless there was going to be some kind of benefit ultimately, right? So again, we're going to go to that verse and then we're going to translate it and then retranslate it on a deeper level. So I regard the Torah of your mouth as superior than thousands of gold and silver. So what's a plain meaning of that verse? Torah is better than riches. I mean, that's okay. We get that. We understand that. Of course, like Torah is more precious to us than riches, right? Real Jewish riches is not physical wealth. It's Torah, mitzvahs, continuity throughout the generations of Torah mitzvahs, right? That's. So I regard the Torah of your mouth as superior than thousands of gold and silver. Wonderful. We understand. Now we're going to retranslate some of those words on a deeper level. So gold and silver on a deeper level, the words zahav and kesef, represent these two love and awe of Hashem. The love and awe of Hashem are represented by the kesef and zahav. Kesef comes from the word l'chseif, which means to yearn. So that's like the love of Hashem, and zahav is red. Gold is like a reddish hue, which represents the side of Gvur, which represents awe of Hashem. So the gold and silver of a person is like their love and awe of Hashem. So now we're going to go back and half retranslate the pasuk. So now we're saying that the Torah of your mouth is superior than love and awe of Hashem. In other words, learning Torah is even greater than love and awe of Hashem. We're talking about the love and awe of Hashem that the soul is feeling in Gan Eden. That's the love and awe that we're talking about. We're talking about the learning of Torah. We're talking about the learning of Torah that a person does in this world. So the learning of Torah in this world is even superior to the love and awe that the soul feels in the heavenly realm. Now, it says thousands of gold and silver, and the word thousands can be retranslated to mean something that the is accustomed to. Alufe, if you look in if you want to look at the Hebrew, it says alufa uragila, something that the soul is accustomed to. So now we are retranslating and saying, I regard and then the Free Jacob says the Torah that we're talking about is the one that he's studying with his physical mouth in the physical world. So now we're going to go back and retranslate the verse. I regard the Torah of your mouth, the Torah that I learned with my physical mouth in this physical world, as superior than the awe and love that my soul was accustomed to having when it resided in Gan Eden before it came into the physical body. And that was a pretty high level of love. But that level of love that my soul is accustomed to in Gan Eden before it came into a physical body is inferior to the Torah learning that my soul does with my physical mouth once it's invested in an animal soul and a physical body. That's how we're retranslating the verse. We get it? And we understand that that supports this idea that I'm darkened but beautiful, daughters of Yerushalayim, right? Right, there could be stuff that's going on. This physical world is full of dust, but when I overcome that and I do Torah mitzvahs with my physical body through the life-giving waters of my soul becomes purified, my body becomes, everything becomes purified, right? So that's why it's superior to even the level of love and awe that my soul felt while it was in Gan Eden, right? We okay? More or less? Okay, this is because it is precisely as a result of the neshama's descent into a body in this world that the neshama attains a level of fresh water. You can put that on your refrigerator, right? Right? It's precisely the result of the neshama's descent into a body in this world that the neshama attains a level of fresh water. It's not fresh water until it comes down here. Remember, it's salty water up there, which salt is a high level and everything else. The reason the verse states that the neshama is compared to a well of fresh water is because for the neshama, which starts off as a garden spring flowing from Gan Eden, to become fresh water, it must carry out the spiritual service of becoming a well. The neshama has to go. We referred earlier in the first verse of today, a garden spring, a well of fresh water. The neshama is Mayin Ganim Be'er Mayim Chayim. It's a garden spring. That's how it starts off. It's a garden spring. The spring is what's underground, but it has to become a well of fresh water. That's what bubbles up after going through the dirt and being purified. In order for the neshama to become purified, it has to go through the process of going from a garden spring to a well of living water. The well is the living water that we can drink. The garden spring we can't drink yet. It still has to be gone through the earth and purified. Right?
That's a very helpful mashal to go through when you're going through hardships. The hardships is the shmutz, I think, that you have to go through in order, and I think that's how you purify the water. The crushed for the light.
The olives that are crushed.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yes.
Yeah, so this is like it's a different parable that I guess it could have a similar sort of style to it, right? Crushed for the light is bringing out the essence of the soul, and purified through the rocks and the earth is elevating the soul, is purifying the soul. I guess probably that's how water purifiers work, right? People have water purifiers, they have these filters that the water has to go through in order to, and the filters pull out the impurities. So it's like here, it's like the earth is acting as that filter to pull out the impurities so that it becomes a well of living waters.
I don't know I was thinking there's an expression between a rock and a hard place, and we often think of like if there's a difficulty and you can't get through it, you feel like you're between a rock and a hard place, but that's the filtering that's going on.
Nice.
I don't know if it has anything to do, but I think amniotic fluid has salt in there.
Interesting.
I'll tell you, I just looked it up on my phone.
Those phones are amazing, huh?
Yeah. So I mean that's like a transitional thing for the body.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, we need some salt, right? I mean, low sodium is a very dangerous state to be in too, right? There is a benefit to salt, but it has to be it's a very specific, I guess, amount, Too much is not good and too little is not good, like most things in this world.
Well, as any vampire knows, blood is salty.
Are you speaking from experience, Johnny? Right, we have salt. I mean, one of the most dangerous things to have is low sodium. Low sodium results in a comatose state. So that's not either okay, right? So we need a certain amount of sodium in our body. But to be called a well of living water, the salt has to be pulled out. To whatever percentage that is, I don't know. And I don't know how much salt drinking water has in it, how much sodium, I have no idea. Maybe you could look that up too, Sarah. But I don't know. But the point is, it's too salty when it's coming from heaven, right? The neshama, where it needs to have some of that salt pulled out, like the ocean water needs to have the salt pulled out. Okay, ready to go on?
I guess we like Hasidus with science.
Well, everything that Hashem created is part of creation. So for sure, the physical sciences reflect, and especially as we're coming closer and closer to Mashiach, we see how science is a muscle almost for Torah, It's not a contradiction, it helps us understand. Okay, so now back into the text, ready? Page 166. The Rebbe explains, in the physical world, we see that although there are reservoirs of fresh water deep in the earth, it is impossible to benefit from them when they are covered by earth and stones. Only by removing this cover is the spring revealed. This is another idea, and that's a well. That's when it becomes a well, right? Like sometimes there could be reservoirs of fresh water deep in the earth. They've gone through the purification process already, but they're still deep in the earth. They haven't come up to the surface yet, right? And we have to remove the earth and the stones to get to them, to access them. That's really how one digs a well. You have to dig into the ground. The well it's not bubbling up by itself. Sometimes something is bubbling up by itself, but not always. Many times, that's how they used to get water, right? Before there was running water and pipes and everything, they would dig in spots and hope to hit a spring. And that's a spring that was fresh water, that was purified water, that now they could, have up at the surface, but the surface wasn't ground level, the surface was beneath ground level, and you would lower pitchers and, all those things. So only by removing this cover is the spring revealed. So too, in one's spiritual service, a person must remove the earth and stones. So this is a second thing, right? The purification of going through the earth is one step, but then once the water is purified, you still need to access it somehow. In order to access it, you need to remove the earth and the stones in order to get to the spring itself, to get to the water. So what is that in the analog? So in the analog, in one's spiritual service, a person must remove the earth and stones, which are the materialism and coarseness of the body and the nefesh habahamis, the animal soul, that conceal and hide the light of the neshama. We have to work on that, right? Take away the coarseness and the materialism. And then we uncover the spring of water. How do we do that? In case anybody wants to know. He's not going to keep the Friedrich is not going to keep us in suspense. There's two ways that we do that. There are two forms of this spiritual work. Remember, what's the spiritual work we're talking about? Removing the coarseness and materialism so that we can access. This water has now been purified, but we're still didn't access it. We need to access it. So how do we access this purified water? There's two forms of this spiritual work. Number one, the first form is the service of studying Torah and performing mitzvos, striving in the labor of the heart, prayer, and conducting oneself with good character traits. This spiritual work is carried out with the revealed powers of the soul. Remember, at the beginning of the Maimer, he said that there's two aspects to our service. There's our deeds and the deeds of our fathers. Our deeds refers to the work that we do with our revealed soul powers, which means our minds, our emotions, our actions. And the deeds of our fathers are those hidden soul powers of self-sacrifice and faith that are an inheritance from our forefathers. So how, again, it's just tying it all back to the beginning, right? We understand that the neshama becomes beautiful and purified from coming down into the body, being purified for going through the earth, then we have to access it. Once it's been purified, we have to access it. So how do we access it? With going back to the beginning of the mimer, with these two things that we talked about at the beginning of the mimer. Number one, through our work with our revealed soul powers. That means our intellect, studying Torah, our emotions and our actions, doing mitzvahs, all of our soul powers, striving in those areas. And that's with the revealed powers. And the second form is the spiritual service in a matter of Mesiras Nefesh or self-sacrifice. That's the hidden soul power that becomes an inheritance from our forefathers. So by utilizing these two means that we have, our revealed soul powers and the things that we inherited from our forefathers, we can access the soul. We can access the pure waters of the soul. This then is the meaning of our sage's explanation of the verse quoted in the beginning of this discourse, right? It's going back to the beginning. I'm darkened but beautiful. That a person who's ugly from birth can't become beautiful, but a person who is beautiful and then becomes sullied will eventually revert back to beauty. Remember, that was at the very, very beginning of the mimer, where the sages explained that a person who was beautiful and then becomes dirty or whatever can be washed clean, basically, become beautiful again. So this is referring to the soul, that the verse can be interpreted as meaning that even though I am dark, in terms of the actions I perform with my revealed faculties, meaning, let's say a person makes the wrong choices, God forbid, right? They become darkened because they became their soul was put into an animal soul, was put into a body. There's lots of schmutz, and they became dark, and they made poor choices. They didn't use the right choice. They became dark in terms of the actions I perform with my revealed faculties. I am nevertheless beautiful by virtue of the deeds of my forebears, referring to the service of God with the Mesiras Nefesh that every Jew inherits from his ancestors. That a Jew always has Mesiras Nefesh for Hashem, always has a level of self-sacrifice for the service of Hashem, and that can beautify them. Let's say a person does make mistakes. So really, the previous Rebbe is ending the Maimar with such a words of warmth to people, right? Who maybe, based on everything else that we're hearing from everything else that he's been saying in this book so far, it's possible may have made some not such appropriate choices, right? That's what he's been sort of trying to get people to make different choices. But he's saying that this verse still holds true for everybody. I'm darkened but beautiful, daughters of Yerushalayim, also means that, yes, ideally, the soul comes into the body, we make the right choice, and just that's all test and all darkness and dirt and everything else. And then through our service of Hashem, through our Torah mitzvahs and everything else, we become beautiful again. But we're also this second level of beauty. Even if I'm darkened by my choices and my deeds, I have this inheritance from the forefathers of self-sacrifice. That's an inheritance, and I can become beautiful through that. I am nevertheless beautiful by virtue of the deeds of my forebears, meaning with the service of Hashem with Mesiras Nefesh that every Jew inherits from his ancestors. I can use that, that piece. So it kind of ends on a hopeful note.
Chaya,
Yeah.
what does it mean that a person who is ugly from birth can't become beautiful?
He doesn't go into that in the mimer. He's he's using it as he's quoting this mimer Chazal as a comparison. It's saying that's not what the pasuk is talking about. So, it's like saying you might think that this is the case, that if the person is ugly, then they're just always going to be ugly. But since they were originally beautiful, they were a soul, in heaven and everything else, you don't have to worry about that. It doesn't say, would there actually be somebody who's ugly from birth who can never become beautiful? It doesn't say even if that category truly exists. It just says it as a contrast, this is for sure not true, right? Hypothetically, if that existed, but this is not that case. I don't know if there would be somebody who they would put into that category at all. I don't know. It doesn't talk about that like half in the mimer. It's using it for contrast purpose, right?
Okay.
But it doesn't describe if that even applies in any context.
Right. This is the most beautiful mimer or sikh I've ever heard. This mimer.
Really? Oh, that's
Right?
that's
The
very
art,
beautiful.
the art of it is just
Yeah, very-
gorgeous.
yeah, it is. It really is. It's quite, yes, it's quite beautiful. It's really quite beautiful. The imagery and yeah, it's quite beautiful. It's very clear.
Women. It
What?
was for women.
It was
'Cause we
for,
can-
it was for women, you're saying?
Yeah, because we can appreciate it in a different way than the men can.
You're saying because it talks about the ideas of beauty.
Yeah, but no, but it's just the way the Frierdiker Rebbe, says it, and all of his writings are extremely poetic.
Yeah. They are they
I,
are.
so I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is very beautiful. I don't know if you feel like if next week you want a review of it, like a summary of it, or it was so short we don't need it. It's up to you, I guess. I mean, I don't mind either way. Usually after a mimer we do a review, but this was only 2 classes. It's up to you if you want to spend a little time reviewing. That's 1 vote for yes, I see.
I'd hate to say goodbye to it so quickly.
Okay.
Let's do a little review, only because there's more nuances that I pick up with the review.
Okay, we could do a review. I don't know if it will take the whole class. We might spend some of the time reviewing and
Then
some of
going
the
on.
time. Yeah,
Oh, yes, it could take the whole class.
that's true. It might. Okay, if you want, I mean, we have 5 more minutes left of this class. If you want, we can read the letter, which is, it's like on the next page of 170, 171, the letter that the Rebbe wrote to the banquet. If you want to, I'm saying, or we can just wait. We could just like wait till after we do the review of the mimer.
Let's wait, Kaya, because it's going to
Okay.
take more than 5 minutes to go
Okay,
through
so
this.
then let's wait. Okay, that's fine. We'll wait. Okay. Well, if you think about your favorite thing from the mimer for the review for next week, like you said, even though it was short, it's quite deep and beautiful. So you can, yeah.
I feel like it's a universal message. It applies to everyone.
Yeah,
No matter what they're holding or where they came from or what they've gone through. It's just
yeah,
so universal, very special.
yeah, for sure. For sure.
Maybe
I think-
maybe Sarah thinks it comes for women because it says daughters of Israel, but the Shekhinah is feminine, right? So
the neshamas are referred to as feminine. It's
Right.
referring to the neshamas here. So yeah. Yeah, and then also I'm just gonna